Hello, everyone, and welcome to this conversation. How we breathe is as important to how much we exercise and what food we eat. It's the missing pillar of health and needs to be considered alongside. In the past few months, I have been fascinated by the breath and various breathing techniques while running, sleeping, and during the day. This was largely inspired by Patrick McKeown, a breathing expert from Ireland. According to Patrick, it's not just about how you breathe during physical exercise, but also about how you breathe during sleep, because that can be a game changer. The first time I heard about Patrick and his work was during the Chi Running Instructor workshop by Danny Dreyer, who also mentioned Patrick's work in my podcast with him last November. An Ireland based international breathing expert and author, Patrick was educated at Trinity College Dublin. He completed his clinical training in Russia in 2002, accredited by the renowned physician and breathing expert Dr. Konstantin Buteyko. Patrick is recognized as a foremost authority in breathing for performance and sleep. He is a fellow of the Royal Society of Biology, and his work has been circulated in international medical journals and by leading literary publishers. He is a breathing advisor to Extreme Performance Training, the XPT program, created by American big wave surfer Laird Hamilton. To date, Patrick has worked with elite military special forces, SWAT, and with Olympic coaches and athletes. He has helped tens of thousands of people worldwide who experience breathing pattern disorders, sleep disordered breathing, and anxiety, and trained over 400 breathing instructors across 45 countries. He has been interviewed for leading podcasts including London Real, Ben Greenfield, Ben Pakulski, Warrior Souls, and Bulletproof. His 2015 book, The Oxygen Advantage, which I have here with me, which was published in 14 languages, retains a consistently high review rating on Amazon and combines specially formulated techniques to increase oxygen delivery to the brain, improve sleep, enhance concentration, and retain focus under stress. Patrick's new book, titled The Breathing Cure, will be launched this month. Joey Williams, SWAT commander responsible for training at Berkeley, California, says using oxygen advantage for the reduction of stress in SWAT and other high stress law enforcement activities is what I am most interested in now. And I have a lot of work to do. Thanks again to Patrick McKeown. I'm super excited to have Patrick talk to us today. So, without further ado, I'll welcome Patrick.
Hello, Soumya.
Hello, Patrick. How are you doing today?
Good. How are you doing? That's a very long introduction. It's kind of nearly embarrassing listening to it.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is a lot more that can be spoken about you, but in the interest of time, we had to cut it short. And yeah, so welcome to all the viewers in India, Patrick.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's
and
it's
I've been
it's it's very interesting to see breathing being discussed in India, which we could always argue is the home of breathing. And
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely, Patrick. So, we have a lot of topics to cover. So we will jump right in. And as and when we have questions from the audience, I will put that up for you.
mhm.
So, just to start, Patrick, everyone knows breathing. It comes naturally to people, and it sounds like really, really simple and automatic. Yet there is so much that we don't know about it, and many people get it wrong. So, how did you get into the profession of teaching people how to breathe right?
I came into it by accident. I was having a lot of asthma symptoms when I was a kid, into my teenage years and into my early 20s. And I also had a lot of sleep disorder breathing too. Waking up tired and feeling very tired then throughout the day. I was a heavy snorer. I was always wheezing, nasal congestion. So I was a mouth breather. And when you have asthma, and I'm assuming in India, the incidence of asthma is probably about 8% of the population. But when you have
Yeah,
asthma, you don't just have asthma. You typically have a stuffy nose, and if you have a stuffy nose or you have nasal congestion, you're more likely to have a sleep problem. So people with nasal congestion are 2 to 3 times more likely to snore and to have obstructive sleep apnea. So I came across this by accident, it was a newspaper article about the importance of breathing through the nose, both in and out, and also about breathing light. And, I started putting that into practice, and it made a difference very quickly to how I felt. I'd always had cold hands and feet, and I never realized that my faster and harder breathing was causing my hands to feel cold. And our blood circulation, even if we were just to look at that, is influenced by how heavy we breathe. Now, if we have a habit of breathing a little bit too fast and a little bit more air than what we need, that can cause the blood vessels to constrict, and we have cold hands, cold feet, and brain fog. So, our airways are influenced by how we breathe, our blood vessels, oxygen delivery, movement, mind, sleep, in actual fact, most of the major disciplines of medicine. And Samia, yeah, people talk about breathing, but not so many people talk about breathing from the dimensions of the biochemistry, biomechanics, and also resonance frequency breathing. All too often we hear, take a deep breath or take a big breath, and that's about, the extent to which the instructor goes. We have to really see that breathing is a powerful tool. It has huge depth. It is a tremendous application. And modern life causes changes to breathing. So that's why breathing, understanding the breath, can be very important to help counter the negative effects of modern living.
Yeah, yeah. Sure, Patrick. And what is the right way to breathe? Because we have so much of distraction around and, so much is happening. And like you said, in modern day, there is so much of, the breathing has really gone for a toss. And a lot of us, think of oxygen as the main thing, and no one really talks about the carbon dioxide. So can you demystify the oxygen versus the carbon dioxide myth?
Yeah, discovered back in 1904 by a Danish physiologist called Christian Bohr. And he discovered that the pressure of carbon dioxide in the blood is a factor which causes red blood cells to release oxygen to the tissues. So if we take a breath of fresh air into our lungs, oxygen passes from the lungs into the blood. Most oxygen in the blood is carried by hemoglobin, which is a protein within the red blood cell. But hemoglobin releases oxygen in the presence of carbon dioxide. Now, the carbon dioxide in our blood is influenced by the carbon dioxide in our lungs, which in turn is influenced by how hard we breathe. So if I said to somebody, I want you to take 5 big breaths in and out of your mouth, or even 5 big breaths in and out of your nose, they would get rid of a lot of carbon dioxide from their lungs. This in turn would reduce carbon dioxide in the blood. This in turn would cause hemoglobin to hold onto oxygen more strongly and not release it. So the ironic thing about breathing is that the more air you breathe, the less oxygen that gets delivered. So carbon dioxide is not just that waste gas. And there's a very interesting paper that was written back in 2017 by a Dr. Singh. And he's a medical doctor and he's also a yoga instructor. And he spoke about carbon dioxide. And he spoke some wonderful things about carbon dioxide. I can't remember exactly his quotations, but what I could do is I could look to pull them up and just go through it.
Yeah.
There is a myth out there about bringing in all of this oxygen and getting rid of as much carbon dioxide. And as long as we continue to do breathing that way, we're not only not helping the individual, but we could be doing harm. Because if a student feels that they should be breathing more air, well, we have to ask the question, well, are they breathing then? Are they doing this intentionally during rest or during physical exercise? And what effect is this having on their body? So, for example, in 2017, a doctor at Subharti Medical College in India wrote a detailed review of the benefits of carbon dioxide. And the paper's author, Dr. Singh, is a yoga practitioner and has dedicated much time to researching how yoga works. So this is really the science coming together with yoga. And he's discovered that CO2, carbon dioxide, it stimulates the vagus nerve. an important cranial nerve that the vagus nerve is wandering throughout the human body, and it innervates most of the major organs. And 80 to 90% of the information communicated by the vagus nerve is from the body back to the brain. So, for example, when we stimulate the vagus nerve, it releases a neurotransmitter called acetylcholine, and this causes a slowing of the heart. So even, for example, people doing physical exercise, if they want to recover quickly, how should they breathe? Well, the exhalation should always be prolonged and slow, because with a slow and prolonged exhalation, you stimulate the vagus nerve. But Dr. Singh also wrote about increased levels of carbon dioxide in the blood can activate the vagus nerve. And he described carbon dioxide as, in quotes, a natural sedative. Now, we know that carbon dioxide plays a role in calming the central nervous system. And we also know that individuals who are prone to stress and anxiety typically breathe faster in upper chest. It's not just that stress and anxiety is causing faster and upper chest breathing, but stress and anxiety, the faster and upper chest breathing is feeding into stress and anxiety. So he goes on to say that carbon dioxide, it soothes the irritability of the brain's conscious centers, promoting our ability to use logic, reason, and common sense. And without carbon dioxide, we become anxious, depressed, and angry. So Singh explains that if carbon dioxide is so good for us, we should work to increase the level of the gas in our bodies. And when we practice a breath hold, which would have been, of course, the origin of yoga, carbon dioxide gradually builds up in the blood. And with that, then we reduce the sensitivity to carbon dioxide, allowing us to tolerate greater concentrations of the gas in the blood. And Dr. Singh puts it, is supercharge your overall health. So, we have to think of the original practitioners of yoga. They understood breathing from a scientific point of view, even though they may not have been, of course, aware of the gases, carbon dioxide and nitric oxide. But when they talked about breathing, and this was in a book called Restoring Prana by a yoga instructor of 30 years, Robin Rottenberg. And she looked at the sutras of yoga and she asked, when yoga was developed, how was breathing described? And good breathing was described as subtle. Now, that word subtle means light, imperceptible. It wasn't hard. And there's a saying in yoga that man's life is not measured by the number of his years, but by the number of his breaths. And if we look at the animal kingdom, animals who breathe fast and hard live shortest. And
Wow.
animals who breathe slow live the longest. So it seems that we have a finite number of breaths. And I think one figure that we came across was about 2 billion breaths throughout our lifestyle. So throughout our lifespan. So if we have a finite number of breaths and one person is breathing 10 to 12 breaths per minute and another person is breathing 18 to 20 breaths per minute, and breathing, the respiratory rate is also a vital indicator. So emergency doctors will be familiar with, not just measuring high blood pressure, not just measuring blood oxygen saturation, but the respiratory rate has been a vital sign. And in a 2008 paper, it's a crucial vital sign when it comes to identifying serious illness. So vital signs are the measurements that doctors monitor at least once a day in patients in acute ward. And as I said, it's temperature, pulse rate, blood pressure. But a lot of the documentation is poor. Research, for example, shows a respiratory rate of more than 27 breaths per minute is the most important predictor of heart attack in hospital wards and in medically unstable patients. And fluctuations in the speed of breathing rate are much greater than changes in systolic blood pressure or heart rate. So this has led to a conclusion that respiratory rate could provide a much more accurate measure of at-risk patients with other vital signs. And a 2005 study reported that 21% of ward patients who breathed at between 25 and 29 breaths per minute, they died in hospital. And another paper from a 2007 study showed that just over half of the patients on general wards who suffered cardiac arrest or needed to be admitted to intensive care, they had a respiratory rate of more than 24 breaths per minute. So in 95% of these cases, these people could have been identified as high risk as many as 24 hours before they became seriously unwell. Now, I know this is an acute situation, but at the same time, it's the idea that individuals with a faster respiratory rate, it's not healthy. And the other thing is, Samya, is that it's not just about looking at the respiratory rate. You know, if you were to ask what is good functional breathing, it's in and out through the nose. It's not in through the nose and out through the mouth. You know, does it make sense, for example, that if you were exercising in a hot environment, so I'm assuming the temperature in, you know, your daily temperature is pretty high at the moment. And if you go for a run in an environment with a very hot temperature, you lose 42% greater water loss breathing out through your mouth. So the individual is more prone to dehydration. The individual who is running with their mouth open is more prone to a dry mouth. And if they're sleeping with their mouth open, they're more prone to, you know, not just snoring and obstructive sleep apnea, but dental health issues, even as, you know, including bad breath, increased dental cavities. And runners who run a lot and breathe a lot with an open mouth also have an increased tendency towards poorer dental health. Now, part of it with runners may be that they're drinking high sugary drinks or, you know, drinks containing a lot of sugar. But we also have to wonder, what about the runner who trains a lot with their mouth open, the dry mouth? You know, could that also be contributing to increased dental cavities?
Right. Yeah, yeah. And Patrick, I tried that myself when I would go on a run. Automatically, I became a mouth breather. That just came very naturally. And then I told myself, and I said, no, I will just nose breathe, even if I go slower, because pace is not important, but the right breathing technique is more important. And every time I would nose breathe, I just used to feel after that run, used to feel like really, really calm after that. It just gave a good feeling overall, and I would also feel less thirsty, right? So,
Yeah.
so yeah.
It's 30 years ago, there was a study on this nasal breathing during running using Ayurvedic principles, Vedic tradition. And they measured the alpha wave and the beta wave state of the brain. And they found that athletes who were running with their mouths closed, breathing in and out through their nose, that they were more likely to enter flow states. So we've seen anecdotal evidence over the years, and, you know, people will ask, well, where is the science? This is really where sports scientists have missed. They've overlooked something here. And the reason that I'm saying this is because there has been very few studies on the importance of nose breathing during sport. But when you consider what the nose does in comparison to the mouth, what does the mouth do for breathing? It does nothing. You know, it doesn't filter the incoming air. It doesn't warm the incoming air. It doesn't moisten the incoming air. It doesn't regulate volume. You don't harness nasal nitric oxide. Mouth breathing is activating the upper chest. Mouth breathing is reducing oxygen uptake in the blood. Mouth breathing, because of the increased volume and harder breathing, is lowering carbon dioxide in the blood. And when you switch to nasal breathing, at the start, it's more difficult. But this is when a training adaptation takes place, that if you continue breathing in and out through your nose during physical exercise, your body adapts to this. And the advantages are pretty amazing. And one is recovery. There's no question that people who do physical exercise with their mouth closed, their recovery post-physical exercise is better. But even during physical exercise, the nose is more attuned to greater amplitude of the diaphragm. And the diaphragm breathing muscle, which separates the chest from the abdomen, it's not only providing a role for respiration, but it's also providing a role for the generation of intra-abdominal pressure. It provides stabilization to the spine. So individuals, for example, with dysfunctional breathing, who typically breathe a little bit upper chest and a little bit faster, they're more prone to dysfunctional movement. And individuals who have poor functional movement are more prone to injury. So here is the question. Can you have good functional movement unless you have functional breathing? And I would say no. And it's not just my opinion, because this is where the studies come out over the last 5 and 10 years have shown this. You know, and 87.5% of people who pass the functional movement screen, and yeah, people will say, well, it mightn't be a great screen, this and that. It doesn't matter. Any screen that you use to assess functional movement, check how people are breathing. And those people who pass it are more likely to be diaphragmatic breathers. And in Bradley's study in 2014, 87.5% of people who passed the FMS were diaphragmatic breathers. And this makes sense just because of the functions of the diaphragm and the role it plays in stabilizing the spine. And, in terms of posture and core strength, we have to ask, is it all about training the abs, or is it also about training breathing?
Yeah. And in fact, no one talks about it. Everyone's just, improving their paces, doing long runs, but no one's talking about breathing as a function which can improve their performance.
Yeah, yeah. And it's
Right.
the elephant in the room,
Yeah.
because even Samya, even from the perspective of the degree of breathlessness, you're a running coach. You will see some students that go for a run and they're really breathless. And you will see other students that are less breathless. Now, it would be obvious to say, well, the student who is more breathless has got very poor, has got poor fitness. But the student who is very breathless could actually have poor breathing patterns. Because if you have a student, for example, who is breathing a lot through an open mouth and fast breathing during wakefulness, well, how they breathe during the day is going to be, their breathing during physical exercise is not suddenly going to correct itself. So how we breathe during physical exercise is influenced and determined pretty much by how we breathe during the day. So we can gauge the degree of breathlessness with an athlete by measuring their BOLT score. And BOLT score provides a good feedback of the degree of breathlessness that one would have during physical exercise.
Right. And in fact, some people are asking, please share some techniques which can be used on a daily basis.
Yeah, there's one. If you have a stuffy nose, don't do this if you're pregnant or if you have serious medical conditions. But if you have a stuffy nose and if you want to open up your nose, simply hold your breath. And yoga instructors would have known about this because they would have been doing alternate nasal breathing and breath holding. So to decongest your nose, simply take a breath in and out through your nose and pinch your nose. And you could just gently nod your head up and down holding your breath.
Right.
And then you let go. Breathe in through your nose and breathe normally for about a half a minute or so and do it again. If you practice that 5 or 6 times, your nose will help open up your nose. The more you breathe through your nose, the better it works. To assess whether your breathing is functional or not, at least to get an indicator of it, measure the length of your breath hold time. And to do this, you just need a watch or a second hand or a timer. Take a normal breath in and out through your nose and pinch your nose and hold. And time it in seconds until you feel the first definite desire to breathe. And when you let go and breathe in and out through your nose. And ideally, your breath hold time is above 25 seconds. And in one paper, that breath hold time was looked at 51 subjects that if their breath hold time was above 25 seconds, there was an 89% chance that dysfunctional breathing is not present. So we need to get the breath hold time a minimum to above 25 seconds. And it's not the length of a maximum breath hold time. You have a normal inhalation, normal exhalation, you hold your nose, and you're timing it in seconds, only until you feel the first definite desire to breathe. So, you're not holding your breath until beyond that, and your breath at the end of it should be fairly normal.
Right. So Patrick, what you're saying is, and what the viewers, is what they've understood is like when you go for any exercise or when you go for a run, it will not. You will have to make an effort to get into
Yes.
nose breathing habit. But if you do it on a regular basis, when you are, just doing errands in the house, or whether you're working or even sleeping, and that's when you replicate it back into the exercise, it will come naturally. So it has to
Yes.
be a full thing. It's not just about exercising, nose breathe, and coming back and mouth breathing.
Exactly. And it's very important that breathing is in and out through the nose during sleep. Like a lot of people in India, like any country in the Western world, or sorry, any country throughout the world, are going to be prone to sleep disorder breathing, including obstructive sleep apnea. And how do we help to reduce the risk of sleep apnea? Mouth breathing is not good because it increases the risk. We use a tape called myotape, which is pretty effective. I'll show it to you because I don't see it to hand here, but yeah, I do. So this is kind of, because people will be saying, like, how on earth can you be breathing through your nose during sleep? Like, and what's the point of putting tape across your mouth? Because that sounds very draconian. So the myotape is just simply a tape that we stretch like that, and it brings the
Yeah.
lips together. And it's with the tension exerted, the tension created by the material as it's surrounding the mouth, and it's pulling the lips together to make sure nasal breathing during sleep. But,
Yeah.
the other thing that I'd say, Samia, is that if we breathe hard, what is it doing? But causing blood vessels to constrict and less oxygen to be delivered. And maybe for your students or listeners to practice what happens when they actually really breathe low. Sorry, what happens when they breathe less air? So looking at it from a biochemical point of view, say, for example, you're sitting at home and you're just kind of relaxing. You could just put your hands on your lap and just gently, really slowly breathe in through your nose. Remember the word subtle from ancient yoga. You're really breathing slowly in through your nose. You can't hear it. It's almost that you're breathing so imperceptibly. And then on the exhalation, you're really having a relaxed and a prolonged exhalation. And then a very soft and slow, gentle breath in, and a really relaxed and a prolonged exhalation. And to breathe light. And to breathe light to the point that you don't get enough air. So by slowing down your breathing to the point that you feel that you're not getting enough air, do that for 4 minutes. It's a great mindfulness technique or meditation technique, and the reason being is because the mind will be anchored onto the breath. So it's more than just following the breath itself. But not only that, as you reduce the volume of air that you breathe, carbon dioxide increases in the blood, and this creates the feeling of air hunger. But the increased carbon dioxide has a calming effect on the central nervous system. So, like one aspect could be is for people to experience, check if you have increased watery saliva in the mouth, check if you have changed the temperature of your hands.
Yeah.
Have people just hold up their hands so it's not touching anything and ask themselves, can I influence the circulation in my hands by changing my breathing? And if you breathe hardly any air for 3 to 4 minutes, by increasing carbon dioxide, you'll feel warmth coming into the hands. And this way we get to know about our own bodies, as opposed to take that deep breath, or now what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to fill your lungs full of air, and you hear everybody around are taking these big breaths, and then ask the question, well, if you're doing that, how does your head feel if you do a few of those breaths, and what's happening?
Yeah. 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 And we have some questions coming up. In fact, a lot of people do a lot of heart rate based training.
Mm.
Uh, right. So we have a question that says, I hear a lot about training with heart rate zone as guides. I felt that using nose breathing as a guide, it automatically made me run with heart rate under control. So a lot of times
Yes,
people invest a lot in heart rate monitors and all of that. Whereas if they just focus on nose breathing, maybe is it that they don't need any of that? Can they
I'm
use
not a
this as
fan
a
of
guide?
I'm not really a fan of technology anyway. Just I think listening to our own body is very important. Our own body will tell us. Now, here is the thing. If you go for a run with your mouth closed, you're going to feel an increased air hunger. And if the air hunger causes a little bit more stress, you'll feel that your heart rate is increasing. But if you were to continue with nose breathing and allowing your nose to determine the intensity of the physical exercise that you do, the more you train with your mouth closed, the easier it becomes, the air hunger reduces, you don't feel as much stress, and then you'll notice changes in your heart rate. So initially the heart rate may increase, but if you continue doing it, the heart rate should be coming down.
Yeah, yeah, sure. Obviously, like you spoke about, maybe you could just tell the audience about what you mean by a bolt score. When you said,
Yeah.
take a normal breath in, normal breath out, and then the first definite desire to breathe. If you could just elaborate on that a bit, and how that a low bolt score would lead to dysfunctional breathing, and like you said, dysfunctional movement and higher risk of injury. So there is a term in running where the runners say on a weekend they went for a LSD, a long slow distance. Whereas in breathing also, like you said, there is a term called LSD, which is you know
Yes,
long,
light, slow,
slow,
and
and
deep.
deep.
Yes,
Light,
yeah.
slow, and deep. Yeah. So can you
Yeah,
just
yeah, that's
explain
funny.
that?
Yeah, light, slow, and deep is really about the biochemistry, the biomechanics, and resonance frequency breathing. What I'm doing is I'm just looking for a moment for a diagram that I can show you. So this is coming from the new book. Um, so just bear with me 1 second. And this may help to explain it a little bit more. So just bear with me one moment.
Yeah.
Oh, sure, I can't. Can I do a share screen? I can actually. Or can I? No,
Okay.
yeah?
I don't think so.
No, I can't. Not to
But
worry.
maybe what
So,
we can do
yeah.
is we can share it after this with the
Okay,
audience for
cool.
sure. Yeah.
Yeah, so basically, we're looking at light is about the biochemistry and how should we be breathing effortless breathing. Like, can you imagine somebody going for a walk and they're going for a walk and they've got this labored breathing. They're not walking, they're not intensely exercising, but at the same time their breathing is disproportionate to the amount of physical exercise that they're doing. That person isn't breathing light. And if you were to look at an elite runner with good functional breathing patterns, their breathing would be so efficient that for a given intensity of physical exercise, they don't need all that much air. That person will have a higher bolt score. And conversely, the person who's walking, that's feeling totally out of breath will have a lower bolt score. And the bolt score is measured by sitting. So you're sitting down for about 5 to 10 minutes and you're just having normal breathing, and you take a normal breath in through your nose and a normal breath out through your nose. You pinch your nose with your fingers and you time it in seconds. How long does it take until you feel the first definite desire to breathe, the first stress to breathe, the first definite time that your body says breathe, and then you let go and breathe? That's your bolt score. And a person
Yeah.
with a low bolt score has disproportionate breathlessness during physical exercise. Now, I've seen some Olympic athletes with very poor bolt scores. People with asthma tend to have a lower bolt score, but also people prone to anxiety and panic. Not all, but 75% of the anxiety and panic disorder population have dysfunctional breathing patterns. And a low bolt score indicates that your breathing is typically faster than what it should be, more likely to be upper chest, and also people who overbreathe will often have a low bolt score. So it's not a perfect screening tool, but it gives you a good indicator. So people who gas out too soon have a low bolt score, and physical training doesn't change your breathing patterns. So if you do a lot
Yeah.
of physical training, it's unlikely that your breathing is going to be getting better, because when you breathe during physical exercise, you breathe according to how you breathe every day. But if you change your breathing patterns, it's a good gateway into improving your breathing during physical exercise.
Yeah. We have a question, Patrick. What about VO2 max and its correlation to breathing in and out through the nose when running?
Yeah, in one paper by George Dallam, its actual VO2 max reduced, and they put it down to that they thought it was just because the individual was more efficient. They didn't need so much air. For example, George Dallam is a professor of sports science from one of the universities in the United States. He got a group of 10 recreational athletes. He asked them to breathe exclusively through their nose for 6 months during all of their physical exercise, and then he assessed them after 6 months. At the end of 6 months, their ability to do physical exercise was 100% that of what they could achieve with mouth breathing. So, breathing through the nose, they were able to achieve 100% work rate intensity. But the respiratory rate was much lower, and their ventilation was 22% less. So for the same intensity of physical exercise, they needed 22% less ventilation. But the fraction of expired oxygen with nasal breathing was lower. And this indicates that the oxygen that the nasal breathing was bringing into the body was utilized better. So VO2 max, it did drop in this instance. And I'm not sure if I'm going to find exactly the explanation, but they put it down to that breathing was more efficient. Now, one aspect here is that when you do breath holding, and we do a lot of breath holds as well, different breath holds to stress the body, to cause the body to make adaptations. So I just came across it. Dalam concluded that it is possible to maintain VO2 max and peak performance after a period of training using only nasal breathing. So the body adapts naturally to nasal breathing by increasing its tolerance to changes in CO2 so that the air hunger is decreasing. So VO2 max is related to hemoglobin and hematocrit. And hemoglobin is the protein that carries oxygen in the red blood cells, and hematocrit is the percentage of your entire blood that carries oxygen. And if you can improve your hematocrit, you can improve your VO2 max. By doing breath holding, it has been showed in some studies, not all, that when you do breath holding, it synthesizes a hormone called erythropoietin from the kidneys, and the liver to a lesser extent. And this causes the maturation of red blood cells in the bone marrow to, in turn, increase oxygen carrying capacity. So there could be a relationship there between improved VO2 max and increased hematocrit as a result of doing hypoxic hypercapnic training.
Right. We have some questions coming in, Patrick. Is there an ideal amount of air to take in while breathing through the nose? Can it be harmful to take too many deep breaths even through the nose?
Yeah, well, you can deep breathe. Well, when we're talking about deep breathing, like what is the definition of it? Um, you know, a true definition of a deep breath is just breathing using the diaphragm, and that's entirely natural. But really, the question to be asking is, how much air should we be breathing? And this is not just by counting the respiratory rate, but when we look at the volume of air that we breathe in 1 minute, that's achieved by looking at the respiratory rate, which is the number of breaths per minute, multiplied by the tidal volume, which will be the volume of air per breath. So when we multiply respiratory rate by tidal volume, it gives us minute ventilation. Normal minute ventilation is between 4 and 6 liters. But for example, people with asthma and people with dysfunctional breathing, they can be breathing 10 to 15 liters of air per minute. So their breathing is too much. So a deep breath in the true sense of the word is great. But what we want to do is we don't want to be under breathing. We don't want to be over breathing. We want to have it right. And, so it's not that the person should be going throughout their day under breathing, because that would add stress. But it's just becoming aware of breathing and also setting time aside at a different time of the day to breathe a little bit less air, to reduce the chemosensitivity to carbon dioxide. And
Right.
it's when we do light breathing and we feel air hunger, your breathing could be shallow, and that's fine. But then to practice breathing low. So this is where the light, slow, and deep comes in, or nose, slow, and low. So we practice each intervention separately. For example, we have 26 different exercises that we have, and we practice them. Each exercise is targeting a different dimension of breathing, and it has its own purpose.
Wow. And where can one see all of this? Is it on the Oxygen Advantage site, or is it the Buteco site?
Yeah, for sports performance, the oxygenadvantage.com site is better. And Instagram as well. I don't know if your listeners are fans on Instagram. We have an Instagram page. There's always information being fed onto it in
Right,
terms of the
right.
science, etc.
Yeah, yeah. So we have another question, Patrick. How can you improve your Bolt score?
So it's improved by, number one, the foundation of it is nasal breathing, both during rest, sleep, and physical exercise. And if you were to do your physical exercise with your mouth closed, your Bolt score will naturally increase once you have your mouth closed for the rest of the day. And also be aware of how are you breathing. Like, good breathing is in and out through the nose. Good breathing is effortless. It's driven by the diaphragm. It's regular. It's slow. Not so good breathing is mouth breathing, upper chest breathing, and mouth and upper chest breathing are linked. If we look down at the chest and take a breath through the mouth, as soon as you take a breath through your mouth, you activate the chest. And
Right.
chest breathing doesn't make sense in terms of physical exercise because the greatest concentration of blood flow is in the lower lobes of the lungs. So if we are to improve gas exchange, the transfer of oxygen from the lungs into the blood, we need to be breathing low. And nose breathing goes with that. So nose breathing and diaphragmatic goes together. Diaphragm breathing assists with slow breathing. So, from a biochemical point of view, a biomechanical point of view, and resonance frequency point of view, that's another aspect, resonance frequency point of view, we haven't really touched on. And this is slowing down the respiratory rate to between 4.5 and 6.5 breaths per minute to stimulate the vagus nerve, to increase the sensitivity of what are called baroreceptors, but ultimately to improve heart rate variability. And heart rate variability is a measure of vagal tone. How well is the vagus nerve functioning? So individuals who are under a lot of stress typically have a lower heart rate variability. And heart rate variability is not an ideal, if it's low, it's not an ideal situation. That it's good to improve it.
Right. And Patrick, a lot of times, no matter how much people exercise or just work out or go for a run, however disciplined they are, they can't go beyond a certain time or distance because they get breathless.
Mm,
So they might not be tired, but it's the breath that's holding them back most of the
yes.
time.
Yeah.
And I think the older you get, the more breathless you get because maybe you haven't experienced, and practiced nose breathing because it's coming into the thing now. I mean, now there is more awareness and now people are just talking about it. So we have a question on that point. What breathing techniques can be followed to overcome breathlessness while climbing steps, especially for those who are above 70?
Like again, you can be practicing different slow breathing techniques to reduce the body's chemosensitivity to carbon dioxide. Um, there was an Italian cardiologist called Bernardi, and he was looking at his patients with chronic heart failure. And his patients with chronic heart failure didn't have good exercise tolerance. They would get breathless quite easily. And he asked the question, why? Was it because of their chronic heart failure that they were getting breathless? Or was it because they had a strong chemosensitivity to carbon dioxide? So he taught his patients how to slow down their breathing. Now, he slowed down their breathing to 6 breaths per minute. And that could be breathing in very softly for 5 seconds in through your nose and breathing out very softly for 5 seconds. Or if you find that too much for you, breathe in for 3 seconds, breathe out for 3 seconds. And by slowing down their breathing, and I think it's not just enough to slow down the breath, but also to underbreathe a little bit. So do slow breathing, but at the same time, feel that you're not getting enough air. And by practicing that exercise, you could be practicing it for 10 minutes, 3 times a day. That in turn then will reduce your sensitivity to carbon dioxide. So when you do physical exercise, your breathing is going to be less.
Yeah. And Patrick, in your book, there is a lot of focus. I mean, most of the focus is breath holding on exhale,
Yes.
right? And, India being the land of yoga, I'm sure people would really want to know because I think in yoga, they talk about, pausing on inhale and pausing on exhale both. So
Yes.
in that
Yes.
context, I have uh, a question here. In ancient yoga, there is a practice called kumbhaka, which is essentially breath hold. In this, there are two types of retentions, one after inhalation called full pause and one after exhalation called empty pause. Both
Yeah.
types of kumbhaka have their own set of benefits. So is it fair to say that Oxygen Advantage only focuses primarily on exhale and breath holding, which is empty pause? If so, why?
Yeah. So the Oxygen Advantage, the book itself, the exercises were written mainly for people with athletes, and for people who are involved in sports. If you exhale and hold your breath, as you hold your breath, the changes to the gases are stronger. So we were doing those exercises primarily to drop blood oxygen saturation and to increase carbon dioxide. And you can lower your blood oxygen saturation if you hold your breath after an exhalation. Whereas if you breathe in and hold your breath, it's a lot more difficult to drop the blood oxygen saturation because you're taking in lungs full of air. So the body has to use that air, use that oxygen before your blood oxygen saturation drops. So that's the main reason why we did those exercises on an exhalation. Now, we also do other exercises then on an inhalation to have, for example, a calming effect and also to help improve oxygen delivery from the lungs into the blood. So say, for example, if you breathe in and hold your breath, you're allowing oxygen transfer from the lungs into the blood. And also if you breathe in and hold your breath, you're likely that you're stimulating the vagus nerve. And then if you breathe out and hold your breath, you're allowing nitric oxide to pool inside the nose. So when you breathe in afterwards, then you're carrying that nitric oxide air into the lungs. And also exhaling and holding the breath. You have lower blood oxygen saturations and increased carbon dioxide. So just slightly different exercises. As a measurement, we
Yeah.
always do everything after an exhalation. And because when we're measuring breathing, we want to have consistency. And if I was to say to different people to breathe in and hold their breath, everybody will breathe in a different amount of air, and lung
Yeah.
volume influences breath hold time. So that's the reason.
Right. Thanks, Patrick. Thanks for that. Another important question, Patrick, is that a lot of runners, they live on like sea level, and
Mm,
they are always fascinated by races up in the mountains. And it takes a lot of planning. They talk about acclimatization and going
mm.
there and getting used to high altitude and so on and so forth. And you have a very interesting take in your book on high altitude simulation. You say bring the mountains closer to you,
Mm, mm.
right?
Yeah.
So can you just give like quick tips on how can you simulate high altitude training, which will help trekkers and runners who basically aspire to go and run and trek on mountains?
Yeah, like it's good to expose. If you're going to do a climb, it's good to expose your body to drop in oxygen, that your body can make adaptations to it before you climb. And don't do any of the breath holds if you're pregnant or if you've got serious medical conditions. But you'd probably, it better if you have a pulse oximeter, and that's a little device that you place on your finger to read how loaded is your hemoglobin occupied by oxygen. The exercises could be as follows. You take a normal breath in and out through your nose and pinch your nose and hold and start walking. And then walk faster and jog faster and jog faster with your breath held. And keep going until you feel a moderate to strong air hunger. When you let go, but breathe very small breaths, 6 small breaths, so that you feel that air hunger across the 6 breaths, and then go back to normal breathing. Normal breathe for a minute and do it again. Do 5 repetitions of it. And that will drop if you're practicing that in a couple of days, you'll start to notice your blood oxygen saturation dropping down to into the mid 80s. That's a severe hypoxia. So you're exposing your body already to, even though it's only intermittent, it'll still have some adaptations because breath hold time at altitude is a good measure of acclimatization. And if
Yeah.
you have an individual who is at altitude, but if they haven't acclimatized, they'll have fast and shallow breathing, but they'll have a low breath hold time. So by having a higher breath hold time at rest, by practicing exercises designed to create the hypoxic effect, but also how should you breathe while you're at altitude? Should you breathe fast and shallow, which is wasting a lot of air to dead space? Or should you breathe low and slow? So if you breathe low and if you breathe slow, you'll improve proportionately the amount of air that gets into the small air sacs in the lungs. So you improve alveolar ventilation. And one studies of climbers at Kilimanjaro at a height of 4,500 meters. These individuals were having their blood oxygen saturation was 80% at 4,500 meters, which is severe hypoxia. They got
Yeah.
the individuals to slow down their breathing to 6 breaths per minute and breathing low and slow, and it increased their blood oxygen saturation to 88 and 99% to mild hypoxia. So we can not only prepare the body for better acclimatization, but also while we're at altitude, should we be breathing open mouth and fast and shallow breathing? It's not efficient, it's not economical, it's trauma to the airways, and it's not good in terms of gas exchange.
Yeah, so I think people, should start practicing this at sea level first to
Yes.
start with, get it a part of their practice and daily life, And then I think when they go up into the mountains, it will come naturally.
Yes. Yeah. Light, slow, and deep. We bring it into movement because, I don't think it's enough to just say to somebody, this is how you should be breathing while you're at rest. How should you breathe when you go for a walk? Same concepts. In and out through the nose. There's no need to overbreathe, but your breathing as well. Have it slower than what you feel it should be and have it lower. Always that light,
Yeah.
slow, and deep.
Right. Thanks, Patrick. Moving on to sleep apnea, you had mentioned in one of your podcasts where you spoke about Dr. Christian Guillermo.
Yeah.
Yeah, a Stanford-based medical doctor who actually coined the term obstructive sleep apnea,
Yes.
and he focused on nasal breathing. And very few people think how we breathe affect our snoring and our sleep apnea. Everyone is skeptical that something so basic can be actually so transformational and it can cure these things. So, if you can just talk about that a bit, and why aren't many health practitioners where we go to even telling us the simple thing that just focus on nose breathe?
Yeah, well, I suppose like doctors don't receive any training in sleep, very little, unless they specialize in it. And typically, it takes about 20 years for something to make change in medicine. Dr. Christian Guilleminault has been talking about the importance of restoring nasal breathing. He talked about the critical importance of restoring it. And he said for children, it was the only valid and complete correction of pediatric sleep disorder breathing. So nobody should be waking up with a dry mouth in the morning. If you're waking up with a dry mouth in the morning, you're more likely to feel unrefreshed. You're more likely to be snoring, of course, mouth snoring, and more likely to have obstructive sleep apnea. So really the first step here is breathing in and out through the nose during wakefulness, and then breathing in and out through the nose during sleep. And the tongue should be resting in the roof of the mouth. I just had an article that was co-written with an ear, nose and throat doctor, Dr. Carlos O'Connor from Spain, and Dr. Plaza from Spain. And we had it published in the Journal of Clinical Medicine. And this is a peer-reviewed, high-impact journal. So it'll be available on PubMed. The article is titled The Breathing Re-Education and the Phenotypes of Sleep Apnea. And we supported it with 150 references of medical papers. Now, even though this information has not got into the public domain, it will, but it's likely to take another 10 or 15 years. And that's how things evolve. And the other thing is, nobody's going to make any money from breathing. There's no incentive for industry to promote breathing because nobody's going to make the vast profits that you can make if you're peddling pharmaceutical drugs, for example. So the research also is lacking. And the other thing is, breathing, I think for the most part, it was seen that was something outside of medicine. It was something seen that was on the fringes. It was something that was practiced by alternative and complementary medicine. And this is unfortunate. And as a result, then there's that stigma that it's normally practiced by the guys going around with the open sandal brigades and tree huggers and, the guys with the long hair and all of that. We really need breathing to be brought into the normal domain, and it should be absolutely part of medicine. There is no question about that when we look at the application of it. And breathing is the one function that we can influence all the major functions of medicine. Respiration, sleep, anxiety, movement. We can also influence dentistry. And we know that children who are mouth breathing, the
Yeah,
impact
in
it
fact,
has
that
on
was
these
my
kids.
next question, Patrick. Yeah,
Yes.
sure.
So,
Yeah.
I think it's going to happen, Samia. I really do. And what I would say to people is don't let the fact that you haven't been told this by your medical doctor, don't let that put you off. Your doctor hasn't been trained in breathing. The doctor has received absolutely no lectures on breathing. And when you consider the basic aspect of this, what does the mouth do in terms of breathing? What does it do? Does it filter the incoming air? Does it moisten? Does it warm? Does it regulate volume? It does nothing. It has zero functions when it comes to breathing. So then you have to ask, well, is nose breathing, is it common sense? Is it logical? Is there any side effects to it? Is there potential benefit to it? And that's what we look for. For children, the debate has been going on for 100 years. And just my dog is after coming in here and there's a bit of a distraction underneath me. So for 100 years, it's been debated in dental journals. And in the new book that I wrote, I really put a huge emphasis on the importance of nasal breathing for medicine. And the fact that our article was being accepted for publication as well, it's a good start. And hopefully it will generate some debate. But for children who are mouth breathing, this is not a joke. This is really, really serious, because their sleep is impacted, but their cognitive development is impacted. No child should be breathing in and out through the mouth. And the studies are here, but again, it just hasn't filtered down into medicine. It's on PubMed. Look at papers by Karen Bonnock. Look at studies by Dr. E.P. Harvold going back to the 1970s and 80s. And he got 3 groups of young monkeys. He surgically blocked their noses with silicone nose plugs. He forced the monkeys to mouth breathe. And all of the experimental animals, they developed the same craniofacial abnormalities as found in children. Crooked teeth is caused by mouth breathing. But maybe there's too much to be gained by allowing children to continue mouth breathe, because there's an orthodontic industry that, they're here to straighten teeth. So why would you be bothered telling children to breathe through the nose if it's going to reduce business?
Yeah, and it's just amazing how just nasal breathing can impact a child's facial features.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the problem is that it impacts child's development for life, not just for the formative years in childhood, and not just the development of their face and airway, but cognitive development. Children who are mouth breathing, which contributes to sleep disorder breathing, children with sleep disorder breathing, if untreated by age 5, these kids have 40% increased risk of special education needs by age 8. And this was a study in Stratford-upon-Avon in the United Kingdom, published in the journal Pediatrics in 2012, looking at 11,000 children. A longitudinal study with such a large population, and yet that information, how many parents are aware of it? Not many.
No. Yeah. We have a question, Patrick. Do the same principles and insights hold good for people with deviated septum?
Yeah,
I think
pretty
this
much.
is yeah.
Many people have a deviated septum. Look at my nose, it's all over the place. So it's deviated septum is when the bone that's dividing the left side of the nose to the right is crooked. The main thing with breathing is, can you breathe through your nose? And if you have nasal congestion, you can do breath holding to help decongest your nose. So if you can breathe through your nose for 1 minute, you can do it for life. Now, when our athletes are running, we have them use nasal dilators. And I have my own little kind of nasal dilator. So this is based on the Cottle maneuver. So my nose, you'll see that one nostril is smaller than the other nostril. And, it would be difficult running with the mouth closed here because the nose is compromised. So if you put one finger here and one finger here and just gently prise your nostrils, you'll feel a difference. And this is called the Cottle maneuver. And a little nasal dilator that you place it into your nose. And it's just a little plastic device. And you have to kind of wriggle it in. And what it does is it simply opens up your nose. So you feel a lot easier breathing through it. And then you can sustain higher intensity physical exercise while continue to nose breathing without having to switch to mouth breathing. Because if your nose is compromised, you're going to feel too suffocated breathing in and out through it. So your ability to do physical exercise with your mouth closed is not only influenced by your BOTH score, but is also influenced by the size of your nose and nasal airway.
Right. And if it's small, then it's tougher to implement nose breathing.
Of course,
because and then your mouth automatically opens, because then there is more air going in through the mouth.
Yes. Yeah. At some point we switch from nose to mouth breathing during exercise because the air hunger gets too much. And people with a small nose.
During a race, Patrick, I mean, when you're in a race, in a marathon or, in a race like that, then people, they are like, I've practiced nose breathing, but now I'm in a race. I just have to finish it. So mostly towards the end of the.
Yeah. That's, during a race, there's times if you can nose breathe, great. And there's times when it gets too much that you might have to switch to mouth breathing, and that's fine too. For recreational athletes, we would say try and do all of your physical exercise with the mouth closed. For elite and competitive athletes, we'd say spend at least 50% of your time breathing in and out through the nose and 50% of your time breathing in and out through the mouth. Because the key here is, if you're nose breathing, you're adding an extra load onto the diaphragm breathing muscle, and this may help to improve diaphragmatic strength. You need a strong diaphragm. Think of the work that the diaphragm is doing. If you have a top athlete, they could be having 40 or 50 breaths per minute. The tidal volume could be as high as 3 liters. That individual could be breathing 150 liters of air per minute. 150 liters of air. You need good strength of the diaphragm breathing muscle. You need good functioning of the lungs to be able to cope with that. And that's why it's important to exercise and to improve respiratory muscle strength as well. Nose breathing is a good start with that too. I can't hear you, Samia. The sound is gone. Elevation masks. We use our own one. We have sports mask, and we typically have athletes wear it for about a half an hour per day. And the sports mask, which is the same as elevation mask. There's different masks out there. The purpose is the same. They basically add an extra load onto your breathing. So their respiratory muscle they improve respiratory muscle strength. Now, what we would say is, do the oxygen advantage technique while you're wearing your mask. Breathe in and out through the nose, breathe low and slow, but also do breath holding, because breath holding, you can lower your blood oxygen saturation while wearing the mask. If you do your physical exercise just wearing the mask, it doesn't simulate altitude training. But if you do breath holding combined with wearing the mask, you've got an increased hypercapnia and you lower carbon dioxide. So you have high CO2 and low CO2, high CO2 in the blood, low O2 in the blood. So that has a training effect. So the masks are beneficial. And what I would say is spend about a half an hour daily wearing the mask. If you overdo it, you'll get a headache. It's fine. The headache goes. The headache is just because of dilation of the blood vessels, because when you improve blood flow or dilate blood flow to the brain with elevated CO2, it could bring on a headache for a short period of time.
Yeah, right. And talking about masks, Patrick, actually, COVID has made us realize that wearing a mask is painful for many. So how can you easily tolerate the air hunger while wearing a mask, especially during exercising? And could this be similar to high altitude simulation? Is it safe? Because there are many articles that state otherwise, that don't wear a mask and exercise and so on.
Yeah, people are going to feel discomfort while exercising with a mask on. And the discomfort that they feel is air hunger. And air hunger is signifying that there's increased carbon dioxide in the blood. And it's absolutely fine, because your blood oxygen saturation, wearing a mask is not preventing air to coming into your body. But what wearing the mask is doing is pooling carbon dioxide inside the mask. So when you rebreathe that carbon dioxide laden air, it increases CO2 in the lungs and increases CO2 in the blood, and that's why you feel air hunger. But with increased carbon dioxide in the blood, hemoglobin releases oxygen more readily to the tissues and cells. So your blood oxygen saturation can drop a little bit because your hemoglobin is releasing oxygen more readily. So what I'd say to people is, wearing a mask, do your best to breathe in and out through your nose. And don't breathe fast and shallow. See, the problem is, people put on a mask, they feel air hunger, but how do they react then? They react by taking fast and shallow and mouth breathing.
Yeah.
And all that's going to do is intensify the feeling of air hunger. But it can also cause fatigue and panic and anxiety. So it's really about breathing efficiently and functionally while wearing the mask. And light, slow, and deep. That's how we should breathe.
Right. Another question, Patrick. Can nasal dilators be used during sleep too?
Yes, they can. Don't use the ones we have. They're quite strong. They're more suitable. The ones we have are suitable for sports. There is a product called mute snoring, which is more suitable. It's a little bit strong as well. You're better off for sleep. You need to get a nasal dilator that's quite soft in the nose. So one that has got rigid plastic like ours is not suitable for sleep. You could use breathe right strips, but they're quite expensive unless you get a generic brand, and they'll help to open up the nose. But you only need nasal dilators if you need them, you know. If you can breathe through your nose comfortably during sleep, you don't need them.
Right. Another question on COVID, Patrick, is that we all know that respiratory health affects us from getting the symptoms of COVID, and it might not stop us from getting the disease, but it will help us deal with it better. So, how can you breathe to optimize ventilation, especially during COVID, where breathlessness is one of the main symptoms?
Yeah, I put a video out on this in March on YouTube. It's at 800,000 views. And if you were to go through the comments, you'll see that I haven't gone through the comments in a long, long time. But if you go through the comments, I'm assuming that you're going to see people who have COVID and who practice the exercises with COVID. You know, we get emails in from people working with people with COVID, and they can have very much an elevated respiratory rate. They're breathing fast. They're very much caught for breath. Some of them, they can't even talk a sentence, you know, because they're so
Wow.
breathless. Their bolt score is 3 seconds. Now, what we want to do is we want to help get their breathing under control and calm down their breathing. And we do that by using small breath holds. So we take normal breath in and out through the nose, pinch the nose and hold the breath for 5 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let go, breathe in through your nose, then breathe normal for 10 seconds. So that's one exercise that we use to help calm down breathing. We also show the person, well, breathe more functionally lower. So they have their hands either side of their lower ribs. And as they breathe in, their ribs move out. And as they breathe out, their ribs gently move in. In other words, don't breathe fast and shallow. But there's 2 videos I put up that would answer this. The first one is 45 minutes. And I guide people through the exercises on YouTube. I'm
Sure.
not sure what the name of it is, but if you put in Patrick McKeown COVID or maybe Patrick McKeown coronavirus, and
Yeah.
the other video that I did was another 45 minutes, how to breathe while wearing a mask. Because I really think there's a lot of panic out there that people are wearing a mask to prevent, you know, obviously because it's mandatory, and the air hunger that they experience while wearing the mask is causing their breathing to be fast or shallow, mouth breathing, which in turn is generating hyperventilation and symptoms of fatigue, etc., and panic.
Yeah. Yeah. And just one question, can you use
Yes.
breathe right during running?
Yeah, they might. The only thing is, if you sweat a lot, will the breathe right strip stick to your nose? So that's why we use something like the plastic dilators. And the other thing is then as well, I suppose, as a plastic dilator, you can use it for 6 months more even. You keep washing it. It's really good quality plastic. Um, so that way it's going to be cheaper in the long term. So yeah, different options to it. And I'll say, Sami, as well, like if any of your listeners have children, all of the exercises for children are up free on YouTube. So if you put in Patrick McKeown children's exercises, you know, and have your children sit down, do the nose unblocking exercise, go through the importance of nose breathing. I think it's really important for children. It's important for everybody, but let's start with the kids as well.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. We have a question on swimming, nose breathing and swimming.
Yeah, it's not going to happen.
Mm.
You know, we have to be realistic here. There's water on your face. If you're breathing in and out through your nose, you might be taking that water into your nose. It's uncomfortable. But what I would say is get your breathing efficient on land and do the breath holding exercises on land. And when your breathing is efficient, you don't need so many breaths when you're covering a given distance. So maybe if you take one breath every 3 strokes, improve the efficiency of your breathing. So you might just need one breath every 5 strokes or one breath every 7 strokes, because every time you come up to take a breath in the water, you lose some propulsion. So it's hydrodynamic drag. And top class athletes, swimmers, they're doing the 50-meter sprint on one breath. They don't take a breath at all. They do the 50 on one breath. So if you can be more efficient with your breathing, by practicing good breathing patterns during wakefulness, and that will translate into how you breathe during swimming. But mouth
Yeah,
breathing is fine. Mouth breathing is fine during swimming. It's really about what do you do. Like, I suppose the question here is, how much physical exercise can you do with one breath? That's the key.
Right. Sure. In the interest of time, Patrick, I will move on where, we know that there is a lot of stuff happening around. People probably are working harder than
Mm.
usual, working from home, and we've been demanded to concentrate, but no one knows how to really concentrate. You need to concentrate, but we don't know how. So many have this naturally, and many have to learn it. So how do we train our brain to bring our attention into the present moment so that it becomes a practice in whatever we do instead of just trying to, find the zone before a race or just before a presentation at work?
I think we're not going to have a calmness of the mind unless we have functional breathing and good sleep. We can do all the meditation in the world. Of course, it's wonderful. But if you have an individual and they have a habit of breathing faster and harder and upper chest breathing, their body is in a fight or flight or sympathetic activation. So if we have an individual and they've got too much sympathetic drive and they're in that stress state, we have to change their state. What I want to do with that person is to achieve a better balance between their stress state and the rest and digest state. And sleep is something that doesn't get attention. And I'm not just talking about sleep for 8 or 9 hours, but talking about how are you breathing during sleep? Is your mouth open? If your mouth is open during sleep, you're going to be breathing fast and shallow. You're more likely to have a lighter sleep. You're more likely to be aroused from sleep. You're more likely to have sleep disorder breathing. And you're not going to have a quiet mind. Like a child, like if we have a poor night's sleep, and every one of us is going to have a poor night's sleep every now and again. That's the way it is. It's almost waking up as if you've had a hangover. If
Yeah.
people are drinking alcohol, that they're waking up, they're feeling lethargic, they're not in a good mood. So, in terms of flow state and in the zone, focusing on the breath is absolutely wonderful. But what I would typically do is improve breathing patterns first. And a lot of people with an anxious mind or even a racing mind, they find it difficult to focus on their breathing because the emotional turmoil is too much. So we would do different breathing techniques to help calm the central nervous system to reduce neuronal excitability. And when the body and mind is calmer, then it's a lot easier to focus on the breath. And, mindfulness is wonderful. Vipassana meditation, I've done a few of the 10 days with SN Goenka. It's wonderful. But we have to bear in mind it was developed 2,000 years ago or maybe 2,500 years ago. Life is very different today. We're sitting down for long
Yeah.
periods of time. We're talking for long periods of time. Talking is not good for breathing. Any of your listeners who talk for a living, they'll notice just how exhausted they are at the end of the day's talking. And activity of the mind and how often we think and almost that we are drowning in thoughts. Look at the information that we're exposed to. I think we have to look at calmness of the mind from a number of different perspectives. Number one is switch off the news. Switch off all
Yeah.
mainstream media. You don't need to listen to it. And it's mostly negativity anyway that's being fed. Be very selective about the information that you let into your mind. Don't drown yourself in information. And that's what we can do nowadays. Back even 100 years ago, we didn't have the information that's constantly bombarding us now. And I'm assuming with COVID, I've stopped listening to news anyway. I stopped listening to news 20 years ago. But even in the times, if I was to switch on the radio, you switch it on at 7 o'clock in the morning. COVID, 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 COVID. 8 o'clock in the morning. COVID, 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 COVID. 9 o'clock. And I would say, what's the point of this? Media, I suppose they're trying to capture some turf here. And
Yeah.
COVID is a great thing that they can be talking about, and everybody is wound up about COVID. Oh, we know COVID is out there. Just turn off it all. We don't want to know about it. That's the way I look at it now. And it's not, people might say to me, well, how are you going to know what's going on in the world? Oh, I've lived for the last 20 years without having to listen to the news. And I don't want to drown myself in negativity and the perspectives and the biasness that are coming from individuals in from some individuals. So yeah, I think it's nice to have a freedom to choose the information that you want to let in. And that also
Right.
helps to bring a calmness to the mind.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That's a great takeaway, Patrick. Um, so, can people with dysfunctional breathing meditate any differently? Because if their breathing is not in sync, then does that impact the way you meditate or just focus
Yes.
on your breathing?
Yeah, without a doubt. I don't think you can calm your mind if you don't have good quality sleep and if you don't have good breathing. And if I was to work with someone, like the reality is, people who have an anxious mind and people who are very stuck in their head, as I was, like I was constantly stuck in thought. My focus wasn't on what I needed to focus upon because I was living in my head. And I missed out on, it's like society. It's different in India. Really India, if you were to look throughout in terms of spirituality and the information that was known, it's really come out of India, all of this information, but it should be the essence of humanity. The essence of humanity is that we are living life with our attention in the present moment. And as human beings, especially in the Western world, we're taught how to think. We're trained how to think. Thinking is seen as good. We're taught how to think, but we're not taught how to stop thinking.
Yeah,
And it's really about bringing that space and stillness to the mind that we can have our attention in life and our attention to move simultaneously with time. And this should be taught in schools. I think it's one gift that could be given to children. I came across by accident when I was in my mid-20s. Most people live life and they don't come across it.
yeah, yeah. There is actually so much that breathing has an impact on, from
Mm,
sports to diseases to performance to sleep to just about everything. And I didn't know that, but when I read your book, it was quite, an eye opener for me when you had, a chapter on weight loss with breathing. And it was a very interesting chapter that, you can actually lose weight without dieting and eating mindfully.
mm.
So, Patrick, what role does the right way to breathe play in the suppression of appetite and managing stress levels? And how does breathing lead to weight gain?
If we have sleep disorder breathing, including obstructive sleep apnea, and if we're stopping breathing during sleep, it affects hormones. And two hormones that can play a role here, one is leptin and the other is ghrelin. And it increases ghrelin. And ghrelin in turn increases appetite. So a person with sleep disorder breathing are more likely to feel hungry the next day. So they'll eat more. And as they eat more, it feeds into their sleep disorder breathing because the more we eat, we put fat in the belly. It affects the movement of the diaphragm. The throat is more liable to collapse. The other aspect is that if we have very much a racing mind, when we're stressed, it's very much emotional eating that can happen. I suppose if people are really, really stressed, they can stop eating altogether. But if people are stressed in their normal everyday life, then it's not to the extreme, but it's a chronic stress. There is a tendency to go to the fridge or to go out of just, I suppose, a calmness to calm the mind through eating. So there's two aspects there. And, I've seen it over the years and we can't reproduce it. That's the only thing. So, for example, I've seen it over the years that when people put breathing exercise into practice, that they were losing weight. But we couldn't always predict who, and we couldn't always predict how. So that was just one of those strange things with it. But I think those are the two main reasons. One is by helping a person to be calmer and, to be mindful of the decisions instead of just going almost on autopilot to the fridge, even if they were
Yeah.
just to be aware of it, that why am I going to the fridge? Because I don't really need the food that I'm going to be consuming here. But the sleep issue is a big one too. Sleep disorder, breathing, and weight gain.
Right. I think, Patrick, this has been really, really very insightful for me and for all the viewers. Everyone's saying hello and really, really appreciating all the points that you've been talking. And in the interest of time, Patrick, I think we are done with the questions. Would
Sure.
you have any parting thoughts to share with people who are, tuned in and who basically, want to improve their breathing to be happier and healthier?
I can start with nose breathing was what changed my life. And if your nose is stuffy, you'll get free nose unblocking exercises on YouTube. They're there. If, for example, you have panic disorder, I'd say go very easy. And there are exercises to help people with panic disorder and anxiety. Again, you'll get the exercise up on YouTube. Ask yourself, just even to be aware of your breathing, like it's been well known, even when studies looking at individuals going to play music, that the individuals who are breathing faster and upper chest breathing with irregular breathing patterns, sighing, were more stressed. And we have to bear in mind that if we're stressed, we can't always think with clarity. So it's very important to be able to, by controlling the breath, we can influence those functions of the body that we normally don't have some influence over. And it's always about the concept of, like, for 25 years, I was a mouth breather, fast breather, upper chest breather. And there's no question, it affects your sleep, it affects your mind, it affects your ability to do physical exercise. And by switching to nose low and slow, or nose light, slow and deep, very important to start off with.
Yeah, wow. Thank you so much, Patrick, for spending time with us and
Sure.
sharing great insights that most of us actually take for granted. So when it comes to breathing, it's nasal breathing all the way, harnessing nasal breathing, which is more stable, the connection with the diaphragm, better tongue resting posture at the roof of the mouth, deeper sleeping, and less snoring, less obstructive apnea, and waking up more alert. The simple and basic things are the most powerful things. As Aristotle said, we are what we repeatedly do. Excellence then is not an act, but an habit. So I think if all of us start nose breathing, it'll just become an habit to just nose breathe. So thank you all for joining. I hope you found this session useful and informative. Do leave any questions or comments below. And just in case we haven't been able to, put anyone's question up or anything, we will get back with the right answer. And we will put in all the YouTube links and the article links, Patrick, that you spoke about, and we'll just put it up here so that everyone gets to see that.
Great, Samia. Thanks so much. It's been a great conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you, everyone. Thanks for listening in. Bye.
Bye.